It was a gorgeous morning. There were birds chirping, the sun was shining, I could smell damp grass and flowers on the side of the road. I could not have picked a more perfect day for a hike. But I was hitchhiking. I've always thought that there are two ways to travel. You can use guidebooks, TripAdvisor, and Google searches to plan everything out with detailed, down-to-the-minute itineraries. Or you can skip the planning and open the door to surprises and discovering hidden gems. Okay. I've always been a planner, but I really admire those people who just go. My first few years in the wine industry, I would travel a lot. And the more I traveled, the more I met non-planners. The guy who bought a plane ticket on a whim and went to explore a new country without doing any prior research or even figuring out where he was going to stay. The girl who one day quit her job, sold all her stuff, and had been driving around for 2 years just seeing everything. I thought these people were so cool. Every spontaneous traveler I've ever met has had a certain kind of carefree, easygoing confidence. I don't know if that's a prerequisite personality trait or something that they gain along the way, but I want it. I want to be the kind of person who doesn't stress over plans. And if you can become a carefree person by traveling in a carefree way, I wanted to give that a try. Hitchhiking seemed to be the best method to practice letting go. You pick a start point and a direction, and the rest is up to chance. Chance and the generosity of strangers. My mom has a few hitchhiking stories from California in the late 70s, but whenever she would tell them, she would always very adamantly say that times were different then. Juliana, don't even think about hitchhiking. What if someone tried to hurt you? You don't know anything about the person who picks you up. They could be some kind of murderer or kidnapper or just plain crazy or who knows. You need to be safe. For 25 years, I followed this advice. But now, I was in New Zealand, far away from my mom. And also, a comment that I'd heard from several older American travelers was that New Zealand now reminded them of the US in the 70s. Perfect! Hitchhiking, here I come. I didn't just jump straight into it. I did some Google searches, I asked around at hostels to get advice from people who had hitchhiked before, I looked up the sunset time and the weather for the day in question, made sure I had tons of maps. I planned out this act of ultimate spontaneity. So here I was, on the road, traveling from the town of Waitomo to Wellington. 300 miles, about 6 hours. I'd left the hostel first thing in the morning and was hoping to make it to my friend's place before dark. I just needed a car to come by. Finally, I heard the rumble of an engine. A pretty loud rumble. I jogged up ahead a little bit to a better spot and went through the list of advice I'd been given. A good open area with plenty of space to pull over and nice visibility. Check. Small backpack. Check. Big friendly smile. Check. Thumb out. Check. And around the corner came the garbage truck. Despite obviously being on the clock, he pulled over. I got picked up by the garbage man. Should I feel trashy? This wasn't quite the romantic image that I'd had in my head, but a ride's a ride, and actually a garbage truck's kind of awesome. My inner preschooler was over the moon. I never thought I'd get to be in one of these. My hitchhiking adventure had officially begun, moving very, very slowly and making frequent stops. I wondered about the etiquette in this situation. Like, should I get out and help? In the end, I just stayed put, but he didn't seem to mind. It took us a lot longer than a normal car would to reach the highway, but we were having a great time. Mr. Garbage Man was super friendly and talkative, and when he dropped me off at the highway, he gave me his contact information and an open invitation to have dinner with his family if I was ever in town again. Cool! Once on the main road, I started the routine again. Big friendly smile, thumb out. Before too long, a little car pulled up. It clearly used to be red, but was now half orange with rust. The driver was an older Maori, a native New Zealander. And this Maori guy was clearly very proud of his heritage. He had the traditional tattoos on his face and all over. If you've seen the Disney movie Moana, I was basically picked up by Maui, except in his 60s and not quite so ripped. As we drove along, he had a lot to say. He talked about the history of the area, the New Zealand wars, about the local Maori, a lot of really interesting things, but I don't remember them very well, because he was smoking the whole time, and they were not Marlboros, if you catch my drift. Whatever. I had a lot of interesting rides that morning. The very next one took me on an unexpected detour. A parasailing instructor and student invited me to come along for their lesson. There's an opportunity. My alternative ground transportation just got me the chance to learn to fly. How cool! It turns out, though, that a beginner's parasailing lesson, watching it anyhow, is boring. So I thanked them and left. We'd gone pretty far off the main track, and I was a bit worried if I'd find someone to take me back, but luck was with me. A station wagon pulled over. I jogged up to the passenger seat, and there was the driver. It was the mailman. You know how here postal workers have the steering wheel on the right? Well, in New Zealand, everyone has the steering wheel on the right, so the postal workers have it on the left. So I was a passenger on the right, which was the wrong side of the car, but it felt to me like the right side of the car on the wrong side of the road, but it was the right side of the road, which is the left, and it was just totally messing with my head. Weird or not, though, he was able to deliver me back to the highway. And there I met a fisherman looking for the perfect spot to spend the day on the river. He told me a little bit about what he was looking for, which was cool, learning. Woo. But the downside to this ride was when he finally found his little fisher's paradise, I was left on foot miles from nowhere. The next car to stop greeted me with the very incredulous question, "Where did you come from? How did you get out here miles from nowhere?" They were a very friendly group of fellow tourists, and we all ended up having lunch together at a little roadside cafe before the next junction. It was shortly after lunch that I got the ride, the one that I had been dreaming about since this idea first popped into my head. Whenever I thought about hitchhiking or had seen it in movies, there's always one iconic image: the hitchhiker getting picked up by a big rig, a great big semi-truck, usually with an older man at the wheel. So I was utterly delighted to hear the sound of air brakes and see a great big 18-wheeler pulling over. Awesome! This particular truck did not have an old man, but two young men, two very flirty young men, with some really cheesy pickup lines. So what do you do aside from looking sexy? I was a little bit worried at first about their flirtiness. I suddenly remembered a comment I'd heard a few months back that was, "Nobody rides for free. It's gas, grass, or ass." I would certainly have been willing to chip in for gas, but grass isn't my thing, and just no. These guys were fine, though. They weren't pushy, just funny. And I had a really enjoyable ride, looking at the view from way up high in this big, big truck, and listening to some ridiculous lines. "Your hand looks heavy. Can I hold it for you?" We had an hour of this before it was finally time to part ways. Much to their disappointment. "You're leaving us. I'd have liked to take you all the way back to my place." "Sorry, bro, that's just not my way." It was getting to be late afternoon when my next ride came. A big van pulled over, and I climbed inside to find 7 miners. I don't mean 7 people under 18. I mean, they made their living mining for gold. 7 miners on their way home from work. I kind of half expected them to start singing. Like, hi-ho, it's home from work we go. It seemed very Snow White. And they did, in fact, sing, but not that. They sang along to the classic rock on the radio. This whole ride was spent singing, telling jokes of varying levels of crudeness, and drinking. They had a case of beer along for the drive. This was definitely a new experience for me. I can get on board with dirty jokes on occasion, but drinking in the car? Like, that's illegal, surely. Apparently not in New Zealand. This turned out to be my longest ride of the day, 2 hours, and it was great. I'm not normally a beer person, but this was such a fun atmosphere that I accepted the bottle they gave me and really enjoyed it. I was pretty sad to say goodbye to these guys when our paths finally diverged. The sun was getting lower and lower in the sky after this. And I was starting to wonder whether or not I'd end up making it to Wellington before dark. The nearest town was miles behind me, and I just wasn't getting rides anymore. I'd walk along for a while, hear a car, turn around, big smile, thumb out, and whoosh. I'd just go right by. Walk a little further, hear another car, turn around, big smile, thumb out, and whoosh. What gives? I was starting to think maybe I should turn around and hike back to town and get a room for the night rather than risk being stranded out here in the dark. I didn't want to do that, but I don't know. I heard another car coming. Big smile, thumb out, please, pretty please. And finally, success. They pulled over. I went over to the passenger seat. It was occupied, so I hopped in the back, and I was surprised to see a car seat next to me with a little boy about 2. Holy cow, I kind of wanted to give these parents a lecture. What were they thinking picking up hitchhikers with a baby in the car? What if someone tried to hurt him? They don't know anything about me. I could be some kind of kidnapper or murderer or just plain crazy or who knows what. And it's gonna get dark soon. Aren't they worried about his safety? We introduced ourselves and started driving, and the wife turned around and started to give me a lecture. What are you thinking hitchhiking out here? What if someone tried to hurt you? You don't know anything about the people who pick you up. They could be some kind of kidnapper, a murderer, just plain crazy, or who knows what. It's gonna be getting dark soon. Aren't you worried about your safety? We had both been channeling my mom. Luckily, none of us were kidnappers or murderers or anything else to be concerned about. It did get dark as we drove along, but they were able to drop me off just blocks from my friend's place. I walked in the door 13 hours after I'd set out that morning. 13 hours to go 300 miles and get to know 20 people that I would never have had the chance to meet otherwise. 13 hours of trying and succeeding at letting go of worries and being content to not be in control. I'd call that a day well spent. Would I hitchhike again? Maybe, but don't tell my mom.